For the newcomer, gravel pits and silty waters are the ideal waters to learn on, in that you have a number of features to fish at, and within reason, once a carp is hooked, you've always got a good chance of landing it. Of course, that can't always be said for weedy and snaggy waters. Presentation is made easier due to those clear areas, and in the main, the carp can be quite predictable in the favourable conditions. It's quite easy to find carp in gravel pits and silty waters, but with a bit of thought and some help here, I'm sure we'll locate them. Well, here we are at a typical gravel pit. As you can see, probably one of the typical waters that you'll start your carp fishing on. Areas of gravel, sand, silt, shale. And whether you're an inexperienced angler or an experienced angler, sooner or later you're going to end up fishing waters like this. Now, if you've only fished small waters full of features, these kind of waters can be quite problematical. When you actually look at the water, it actually looks quite huge and featureless. That can be a problem for the inexperienced carp angler, as in effect is nothing to cast at. And if you've got nothing to cast at, many people make the mistake of just throwing in anywhere and hoping for the best. That's a big, big mistake. If you think about your fishing, certainly on gravel pits and silty waters, you'll come to grips with it and you'll catch carp. Looking here, it's a typical gravel pit, large areas of undisturbed water. If you want to catch carp, the most important thing is the location of carp. For even with a great bait and a great rig, if you place it in the wrong spot, you're not going to catch those carp. So you've got to locate those fish. Now obviously if you know where the fish are, that's great. But for many of you, it's a question of sorting out where you think they are on the day in question. No obvious features to cast at, but there's one or two areas that strike me straight away. The quiet spots underneath the trees. Although it looks close in, fish will patrol these margins in that all the food blown by the incoming wind will be thrown against the side of here for the carp to feed on. So those are excellent areas to fish, especially with this nice warm wind blowing in. Further round from me, you've got the headland, the point as they call it. Anywhere where a point breaks the water will funnel away, driving oxygen into the water, and food will be laid along the sand's edges of the banks. Again, another excellent area. And if we go out towards the middle of the lake, although it looks totally featureless, because most people can't cast any further than 60 yards, if you can cast more than anybody else can on the lake, then that's going to be a hot spot. Fish under pressure will move into that central area, and if you can reach that central area, you'll often find fish stacked up there. So those are three areas, even if you don't know anything about the water at all, that you should look at. If you can, always try and visit the water in advance of your actual fishing session. Although that sounds a waste of time, believe you me, it isn't a waste of time. If you can just spend half an hour or an hour, a couple of days a week or maybe one weekend looking at the water and seeing where the fish is showing and what angler pressure has effect on the fish, it's all good time. It really is. However, I accept that for some of you, you just haven't got the time or the money to waste that kind of time. I accept that. What you should do though, when you get to the water, sit and look at it. And actually do look at it. Don't look elsewhere. Look at the water. What do you see? Can you actually see all of the water? Or are areas of the water hidden from view? If areas of the water are hidden from view, then you'll actually have to walk round all of the water. When you're walking around the water, look at it. Look in the edges. Use your common sense. Don't just chat to your friends and look what the neighbours are doing and things like that. Actually spend your time constructively looking at it. It is vitally important. In these large lakes, these gravel pits, these silty waters, fish movement is the key to location. These fish tend to be on the move quite a lot in the summer months, and they'll betray their presence by jumping out, by what we call head and shouldering. If you can see fish head and shouldering in what is otherwise a featureless area to your own eyes, then that could indicate there's a feature there. A gravel bar, a plateau, a gully, could be a hot spot. So use your eyesight, look for those fish. Not all fish leap straight out and make a big splat. The best ones just stick the head out and drop down nice and slowly. It's called head and shouldering. And if you can actually find those spots, they could be hot spots for you. Normal eyesight is great, but nothing beats a pair of the sunglasses like this, the Optics Cormorants. If there's any sun on the water at all, you'll start to squint, and the sheen off the water makes it very hard to see fish subtly head and shouldering. So it's very important to get a good pair of glasses, very important indeed. As well as glasses, always consider thinking about buying a pair of binoculars. When fish are showing at range, it's very difficult with the naked eye to actually see the fish for sure. It's difficult to tell whether it's a bream or whether it's a roach, whether in fact it's a carp. Binoculars actually allow you to see at range and to see if a fish is bubbling, smoke screening, turning up bubbles, turning up mud on the bottom, so it gives you a heck of an advantage. You don't need a huge pairs. Nice small compact pair like this, which will easily fit into your tackle box, are ideal. So walk around that water, use your common sense, your eyesight and your binoculars, and see if you can locate the carp that way. If you can't actually see any features on the water, and you can't actually see carp with your eyes or your binoculars, you're going to actually have to find the features underneath the water. And that's when we start plumbing and leading about. In Practical Carping 3, when we covered the weed and the snags, we actually looked how to find the features in a weedy water. Now it's quite different when you fish a gravel pit or a silty water. It's a completely different kind of water bottom. And for that reason, we're going to have to look at a different kind of plumbing setup and exactly how to use a leading rod in conjunction with that. The plumbing setup for use in gravel pits and silty waters is quite straightforward. We've got a bright coloured polyball there on an arm. You can get these from most good carp shops. 2 or 3 rubber shocker beads to protect the knot, and a standard running bead. A 3-ounce bomb with a sleeve of tubing over the swivel attached to a fox run ring. When you tighten up to your bomb, your float is as such, and as you pay off line, the float rises as that. You need to have a large area there so that your line doesn't get stuck and you get a false registration. Very easy indeed. Always carry spare markers with you. Don't just go with the one marker. I even carry different coloured ones for use in different light. Spare marker floats, essential. A good idea is to just draw view lines or sight lines so you know what you're casting against. As you can see here, we've got the buoy in front of us, the tree in the corner, the high points on the trees, the bridge that runs across, and obviously the bridge that runs down there. Little V point on the top of the bridge. When I'm casting my leading float out, I've at least got something to sight it up with. So it's very important to mark those down, otherwise you won't know in future what to cast out at. So pick your sight line, rod back and cast out to the required distance. Let the float of the lead sink down to the bottom. Now tighten up so that float is tight against the lead. Then open your bail arm up, keep your finger on that line to hold it tight and start paying it off. 1 foot at a time. 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot. So we know the depth there is just over 3 foot. I then wind in tight again, draw the marker float back about 1 yard or 2 yards and repeat the process. I do this all the way back for say 10, 20 or 30 yards until I'm satisfied that I know the depth in that line. I'll then do it to the left, I'll do it to the right, and that will build up, in my mind and on paper, an accurate depth mark. What we're looking for are hot spots, features under the water, features that are not above the surface, but features that are below the surface. Gravel bars, gullies, plateaus and drop-offs. The carp use these areas as motorways, as roads under the water. A gravel bar. The carp will move along the side of those gravel bars and feed on food deposited on the side of the gravel bar. Might feed on the top, on the side, on the bottom. At least if you know the depth of the gravel bar how wide it is, how long it is and where it is, you know the areas to place your baits. Similarly with plateaus, they're shallow areas with deep water either side. The carp will feed on those areas and they will bask on those areas. Again, the drop-offs, that's the sides of the bars and with the sides of the plateaus that just drop straight off. The carp will move along the side of those and feed on them. So by using your eyesight, by using your plumbing rod, you can actually build up some idea of the features that are out in front of you to help you with locating the carp. As well as locating the carp with a plumbing rod, you also use what is known as a leading rod, and I'll take you through the process of leading around in a gravel pit or a silty water. Whilst plumbing will tell us the depth of the water, leading about tells us what is on the bottom of the water, where our hook bait and end tackle are resting. Leading about is the dragging of a bare lead along the bottom of the water, and as it pulls over the weed, the gravel or the silt, the vibrations are transmitted down the line into your hands, then you can know exactly what you're casting into. I'll show you how to do it. Tighten up, bail arm over, rod back, pick your sight line and cast out to the required distance. Let the lead fall through the water on a tight line so you can actually feel what it thumps down onto. Gently tighten up to it, stand sideways and draw your rod tip. Don't wind in, use that rod tip to draw the lead along the bottom. As it moves along the bottom, it will run over whatever is on the bottom of the lake. Tighten up again, and again draw back. As you can see the plucking there, that's caused as the lead rasps over the gravel. You do this for as far back as you need to do. Gravel bars, plateaus, gullies will all register with the rod tip moving in a certain way. When you're pulling up to a gravel bar, the tip will kick back as the lead comes up the bar, and then it'll smooth out, and as the lead falls off the bar, your rod tip will go slack and your line will all fall away. So by casting out and leading out, you can actually feel what your hook bait is laying on, which is vitally important. Don't just cast out and hope, plumb about, lead about, and you'll catch those carp. Let's now have a look at the tackle to use in gravel pits or on silty waters. Don't worry, you don't actually need to rush out and buy anything specialist, as for most of you, on most waters, the standard tackle will do. Sure, for long range fishing over 120 yards, or for very specialist circumstances, you might need certain bits of tackle, but I bet the tackle you've got and are currently using will do for most waters today. Let's just look at the tackle that I'm using at the moment. Standard 12-foot carp rods, these are the Daiwa amorphous ones. Although they're 2 3/4, anything over 2 1/4 pounds should be able to cast you 3-ounce lead at least 60 yards, because we're looking at really fishing at least 60 yards out and possibly up to 80 yards. Again, these are large capacity reels, but any standard Shimano, Ryobi, Daiwa, which will cast 3 ounces of lead at least 60 yards and preferably up to 90 yards, will do. The buzzers that I'm using here are the Fox Micron DXRs. Now these are the top of the range buzzers, but there's absolutely no need to buy this kind of buzzer for standard fishing. Any Fox Mini Micron, Delkim or Optonic will do, providing they're sensitive, waterproof and don't let you down. That's what you want from a buzzer nowadays. Because I'm using 3 rods, I'm using the dual bars again and the Obelisk bank sticks. Now I'm actually quite lucky in here in that I can actually push my bank sticks into this soft ground. However, there are occasions when the ground is rock hard, full of gravel and whatever, so you'll actually have to use what we call the stabiliser. You only need to actually push your bank stick in, say ½ an inch, push the 2 prongs down and they stabilise that bank stick. Tighten up and that will hold that bank stick tight, even though it's only gone ½ an inch into the ground. When the ground is very hard, or if you're fishing on concrete stanchions or wooden boards, it'll be impossible to actually push your bank sticks into the ground. For that reason, you'll need to use what was known as a rod pod. I'm sure you've all heard of rod pods. There are countless available. It really doesn't matter which one you choose as long as you buy a good one. not because of what it looks like, but of how it performs. This is a Fox Europod. I like this. It's solid, it doesn't fall over in a wind, and it supports 3 rods securely. Never mind what it looks like, it's how it performs. On these waters with very hard gravel banks, and sometimes almost concrete-like banks, it's important to think about the care of your carp. Don't cast out, start baiting up and fishing without setting the equipment up first, because if you get a carp and you're not prepared, it could cost it dearly. A padded unhooking mat, weigh sling, forceps, scales, clinic, all ready for as soon as I catch a carp. I don't want to be floundering about in my rod bag looking for these things. I want to be able to protect the carp straight away. It really is important for the future of our carp. People get very confused over which rigs to use in gravel pits and silty waters. Some use exactly the same rigs that they use year round. They use them on weedy waters, in rivers, in canals, on lakes, abroad, at home. It makes no difference to them, but it really does make a difference. If you experiment with your rigs, you can certainly double, or if not triple, the number of takes you're getting on certain days. The rig I'm using here today at this gravel pit is a standard 3-ounce coated bomb, a couple of shocker beads to protect the knot, 15 inches of silkworm, and a standard bottom bait. Very basic presentation, but one some people can't come to grips with. Let's have a look at the rigs you can use in gravel pits and silty waters. For fishing in gravel pits or silty waters, the ideal rig to use is what is commonly known as a helicopter rig. And the reason why it's known as a helicopter rig is that when in mid-flight you cast out, that will twirl round like a helicopter rotor blade. Now the components to make a helicopter rig are very simple indeed. We use a standard Corda lead. This can be 2 ounces, 3 ounces or 4 ounces depending on how far out you want to cast. You can also coat that to protect it from gravel damage. We're using standard Eustace 0.5mm anti-tangle tubing, 2 rubber shocker beads, some Drennan feeder pult elastic for that part, and the standard size 7 swivel. And to make it up is very easy indeed. You just thread your main line down the tubing, you put that piece of Drennan tubing over the top of that, you tie your main line to the swivel, you then slide down 1 bead to there, you slide down your swivel to there, and you push your second bead to there. When you cast out, the swivel will rest against the bead. But in the event of a crack-off, the weight of the fish's pull will push that bead off, and the swivel will come off, and the fish is free to swim free. Now the one thing about this is you can actually use it with this anti-tangle tubing. You can use it without anti-tangle tubing, providing you use a stringer, or you can use lead core line. Any of those will make an excellent helicopter rig, which is ideal on most gravel pits today. Another very effective rig to use in gravel pits or in silty waters is what is known as a running lead. It's called the running leg because the actual hook length is not fixed against the lead here. When a carp takes, it can actually pull the main line and the hook without moving the lead, hence the name running lead. Now to make a running lead, you need to use quite a large size lead. The leads here are 2 ounce, 3 ounce and 4 ounce. If you use a very light lead, then when the carp picks up the hook length and starts to move, the lead will move and will not run. By using a heavier lead, the line is free to move through the swivel, hence a running lead. To make a running lead is simplicity itself. Again, a standard bomb, the Drennan feeder pult elastic over the swivel, that forms the running area. If you don't wish to do it that way, you can just mount the swivel like that with a helicopter bead. Again, the line is free to run through the bead. You don't automatically have to use these kind of leads, as you can use the dumpy leads or the round leads to make a very effective running lead setup. Many of today's carp rigs use a heavy lead of at least 3 ounces and sometimes up to 4 ounces. The purpose of this mainly is to actually pull the hook into the carp's mouth, so causing it to bolt off. But obviously sometimes you need to use a large lead to cast any sort of distance. To cast 3 or 4 ounces of lead, you need to use a main line of at least 15 pounds to absorb the shock or the force of the cast. When you're using a main line of this sort of type, the Trilene 15 pounds big game, there's not a problem. That will absorb the force of a cast and you'll actually be able to cast up to 60 or 70 yards. However, there will be occasions when the carp is showing further out than 70 yards and you have to cast at least 70 yards and sometimes up to 120 yards. Now for that, you cannot just drop your main line to 8 or 9 pounds and hope, because what will happen is that when you cast out, the force of that 3 or 4 ounces of lead will be impacted onto your main line, and halfway through the cast it will snap off, giving you what is known as a crack off. This is very dangerous in that a baited hook will be left in the water which a carp could pick up and could cause itself injury. Also, a cracked off lead is like a bullet and could cause injury to a fellow angler. For that reason, we use what is known as shock leaders. You can use a fine main line of 6 to 10 pounds and then a heavy shock leader to absorb the cast of 30 to 40 pounds. My favourite shock leaders are the standard mono in at least 30 pounds, the Amnesia shock leader here of 20 or 30 pounds, or in gravel pits, the best one is the 35 pound Christen Quicksilver leader. The reason why I prefer this in gravel pits is, as you can see, it's nice and brown and abrasion resistant. It absorbs the force of the cast and also blends in nicely onto the lake bed. The problem about shock leaders is that many people don't know how to tie them properly, and many beginners seek to avoid it and use either a heavy main line, which means they can't reach the distance, or risk it with a finer main line, which means they'll crack off. There is no need to do that. You must learn how to tie the shock leader knot properly, and as the diagram illustrates, it's a very simple knot. One of the best methods of catching carp in gravel pits or silty waters is by way of a bottom bait presentation. This is a very basic presentation, and on most waters today this will work well. There's no bottom weed to catch around your hook and your hair, and this is ideal. Just need a few components to make this presentation up. You've got the standard bait floss for your hair, you've got the shrink tube or soft tubing for your liner, the dumbbell hair stops to hold your boilie on. We're using silkworm 8 pounds, or you can use multi-strand in 15, which is very fine indeed. And we're using small hooks, either size 8 or size 10. These are the Fox Series 1 hooks, which I'm very confident with, or you can use the equally good Ashima C310 carp hook. Notice how small these hooks are. When you're fishing in gravel pits which are clear and fine, you don't want to use big hooks and thick braids. You want it as fine as possible. To tie it up is simplicity itself. Tie your hook length to your hook with a standard grinner knot. Now, bearing in mind you're only using 8 pound braid, tie a very, very secure knot and test it properly. Put the boilie on the hair and attach the hair to the eye of the hook. It should just hang so it's touching the bottom of the hook. Thread on your liner, which will either be made out of soft tube or shrink tube. Slide the liner down so the exit point of the dental floss is directly in line with the hook point. And that is a standard bottom bait presentation which will catch on most carp waters today. You can make the baits a lot smaller or a lot bigger, and you can make the traces anywhere between 6 inches and 24 inches. When carp have been caught time and time again on standard bottom bait, they may become a little bit wary of the bottom bait. If you think about it, the bottom bait is different from a standard free bait in that it has a hook attached to it, and the carp may feel the weight of the hook. So to get round this, we incorporate the use of a balance bait. All this is a standard bottom bait with an element of buoyancy in it. It could be a polyball, a piece of cork, or whatever. You could even microwave it. This polystyrene polyball will hold it up like that, as so, from the bottom. You mould a small piece of heavy metal around the bottom of your liner, and it holds it like that. When the carp comes along and sucks at that, because it's lightly balanced, fly into the carp's mouth and more than likely hook it. Balance baits are ideal in gravel pits and silty waters. One of the little edges that I have found and used in carp fishing that has been to my advantage and to many other carp anglers' advantage is the use of coating leads. Now, coating leads is highly important for one of two reasons. Firstly, as you can see, gravel is very abrasive, and when you cast out and your lead hits that gravel, if it's uncoated, what will happen is that your lead will become marked, and when you are casting out time and time again and playing fish, your line and your main line and your hook length will rest against this, and that can cause it to fray. By coating the lead in the special paint or coat as I describe, it actually protects your lead and stops it being damaged. Secondly, a black lead doesn't half show up over gravel, doesn't it? You can see there, black over brown. By coating your lead either brown or lighter brown, it doesn't stand out to the carp. All hook baits and hook lengths end up next to your lead. And if your hook bait is next to a black lead, the carp may wise up and may see that black lead, and they may think that it's dangerous and they'll avoid it. By coating the lead, the carp won't be so aware of it. You can coat leads in a number of ways. You can actually use the standard paints, brown, green, and make the lead match the colour of your lake bed, even if you fish in a weedy water. Or you can use the special coating powders that are available from Corda and Gold Label and coat the lead as such. Or even nowadays you can actually buy ready coated leads that match most lake bottoms. Very important coating leads. Although sticking with the same presentation week in, week out has its advantages, when you're fishing a silty or gravel pit water, it's important to use as fine a presentation as possible. In weedy waters you'll have weed all over the bottom and snags, and it doesn't really matter too much. But in the clear gravel pits it's important to use as fine a presentation as possible. Most carp anglers nowadays use size 6 or size 4 hooks. In the weed this won't make a difference at all. But when you're fishing these clearer waters, try and use as small a hook as possible, a size 8 or a size 10. These are the Fox Series 1's hooks, which are very strong. However, you can use the Ashima carp hooks or the Drennan Super Specimens. They are equally good. The standard hook length that most carp anglers use nowadays, be it a braid or a monofilament, is around 15 pounds. Now this is the kind of hook length that I would use in most waters, certainly of a weedy or a snaggy nature. It's the Merlin. However, when you fish a gravel pit, it's a completely different kind of water, and if there's no snags or weed present, and the water's clear and it's not very deep, then you want to use as fine a hook length as possible. This is silkworm in 8 pound. It is very supple and offers the bait lots and lots of movement, and it's also very fine and doesn't show up to the carp as well. One of the problems with hook lengths today is that although they are very supple, very abrasion resistant and proven, they do have an element of buoyancy in them, and when you cast out they do tend to remain looped as so. In a weedy water this won't matter at all, because the carp are used to strands of weed brushing against them, and they'll see that just really as a strand of weed and it won't scare them. Having a gravel pit which possibly is shallow, the water is clear, then the sight of that may well scare the carp, and certainly the feel of it against the bodies may scare the carp. So what we need to do is take the loop out of it. Now there are various ways to take the loop out of these hook lengths, and there are two which I use more often than not. The first is by way of use of a product called Magma. It's a liquid lead. You squeeze a little dot on your hook length, allow it a minute or to a minute and a half to set, roll it between your fingers and it will form a little blob like that. Do 1, 2, 3 marks of magma approximately 2 inches apart, and when the hook length comes down like that, the weight of the magma will cause the loop to fall over and to sit it down. You can also put a piece of heavy metal between your fingers and rub your hook length up and down that, so transferring minute particles onto the hook length, which also causes it to sit down. This is very important, as it often can mean the difference between disaster and success. Bait can be as complex or as easy as you want to make it, and whether you're fishing a silty water or a gravel pit, the standard baits will catch carp. Although for the purposes of this video we're only going to look at boil baits, you can catch carp on floaters, particles, standard baits like meat, luncheon meat, cheese paste, bread. But what we'll do today is have a look at the boil bait aspects of things. Let's think about which bait to use in gravel pits and on silty waters to improve your chances of success in both the long and the short time period. Fishing a gravel pit or silty water is like fishing any other water. You have to be confident in the bait that you're using. If your current choice of bait is one that you're happy with and have caught carp on, then keep on that bait and don't change it. However, I've got a recipe that I've been using since 1986 with total confidence. It has worked week in, week out, in, year out, particularly well on gravel pits. And this is a recipe which uses Enovite Gold, which is a digestible birdseed, the famous strawberry and the famous cream flavours, the bergamot essential oil, milk bee plus, and also the yellow colour as the recipe indicates. This is very digestible. You can put quite a bit out and the carp will eat it and come back for more. It's also highly instant, so if you can only do short trips to gravel pits, you would expect to catch on this fairly well. If you can't afford to make your own boilies or haven't the confidence, you can now purchase ready-made boilies that mirror exactly the same recipe. As you can see, this is the strawberry, the cream, the bergamot, ready rolled for you. Of course you'll pay a little bit more because they've been rolled for you, but they're ideal for beginners and people of less experience, and they will catch just as many carp as those. When you fire out your boilies with a catapult or a throwing stick at the gravel pit, all of them will rest on the bottom. And by using a bottom bait as a hook bait, it mirrors exactly those free baits. You can use small baits, medium-sized baits, or large baits. These are just fished on a standard hair rig as we illustrated earlier. Keep them in a pot so you know exactly what kind of bait you've got on, be it a pop-up or a balance bait or a bottom bait. Although standard bottom baits work well on gravel pits and weedy waters, you always have to remember that there is a hook, a hair and a hook length attached to that bait, so it is slightly different to the free baits that you've catapulted or throwing sticked out. To get round this, you can use a balance bait which puts an element of buoyancy in the hook bait. Very easy to do this. You can either use polystyrene, either cut or polystyrene balls or cork balls, which are available from most manufacturers today. Take a piece of the paste of your boilie and just roll it round the cork ball, as so. Once it's rolled round, roll it in your hands and you'll get a hook bait like that. Now that of course has got an element of buoyancy in it. You can then hair rig that onto your hook and it'll just rest above the bottom. The carp comes along, sucks at it, and because it's slightly buoyant, straight into the carp's mouth. When you're fishing a gravel pit or a silty water, it's important to make sure that the carp can find your hook bait. And one way of making sure that the carp finds your hook bait is to present it off the bottom, and that's by way of using a pop-up. You can either make your pop-ups as we illustrated with a balance bait, of course putting more buoyancy into the bait, or you can purchase ready-made pop-ups. Again, keep them in the tub so you know which ones are your bottom baits, which ones are your balance baits, and which ones are your pop-ups. The only problem with pop-ups in gravel pits is that because the water is so clear and the carp have the ability to see the baits, a bait which is presented 1 inch, 2 inch or 4 inch from the bottom is totally alien to the normal food the carp finds. All your standard free baits will be laid on the lake bed and your pop-up will be presented well above those. In a weedy water it won't show up so much, but in a gravel pit or silty water this will stand out to the carp. At first it may well interest the carp and catch them out on that alone, but eventually the carp will become wise to a pop-up showing like this and may seek to avoid it. So try and keep your pop-up as close to the bottom as possible. If possible, try and keep it balanced like that. In order to hook a carp, you've actually got to get it to take the hook bait into its mouth. Now, if you fired out 200 or whatever boilies and you've just got 1 or 2 hook baits out there, then your chances is 1 or 2 in 200. It's important to make sure that that hook bait stands out to the carp. And to make it stand out to the carp, you can use what are known as bait soaks. They obviously increase the level of attraction of the hook bait. You can use one of 2 methods to make a very effective bait soak. You can put your boilies in a bag and you can add the neat flavour, say 1 or 2 mils, to the bag, inflate the bag, shake them round, let the flavour soak in and use those as hook baits. Or you can use what is known as an overspray. You can put the hook baits in a bag and again spray that on them and that will soak in. You can either overspray your hook baits or you can overspray your standard free offerings, but clearly if you overspray your free offerings to make them more attractive, your hook bait won't stand out. But on gravel pits, and certainly in the colder months, a bait soak is very effective indeed. The purpose of free offerings is to attract the carp to your hook bait, and obviously the more free offerings that you fire out, the more attraction there will be around your hook bait, and so hopefully the carp will go down and pick up your hook bait. The problem is if you fire too many boilies out and the carp feed on those boilies before they even find the hook bait, they may have had their fill and you may not be lucky. To avoid this, we use a process known as crumbing and chopping of baits. Exactly the same amount of bait, but they've been cut into halves, quarters, thirds or whatever. Clearly these will be spread over around your hook bait and the carp won't fill up on these quite as well. The retraction is leaked out because the skin is broken, and you'll have 1 hook bait above those or near those which the carp are more likely to pick up as it's a larger single free offering. To break these down even smaller, you can actually crumb these into your hands or put them through a liquidizer to form a fine ground bait like crumb. Then you'll have all the attraction of 50, 100 or 200 baits, but just 1 hook bait in all that for the carp to feed on. When you cast out your hook bait as so, there obviously is the attraction of 1 boilie only there. Now, to increase the attraction of the boilie, to make it more likely to be picked up, you can obviously use a pop-up, a bait soak or a larger bait. Another excellent way around this is by way of using a little trick of the trade called the use of the stringers. Now, a stringer is a line of baits on some PVA string. PVA string, hence the name stringer. All you need to do this is to get your gardener stringer needle and thread 1, 2, 3 baits on. Although I've only used 3 there, you can use 1 or you can use 20 baits, it really doesn't matter. Get your PVA as such, and the PVA that I'm using is a Chrysler Meltdown PVA. Hook that round like that and draw it through the boilies. This will then give you a little stringer of PVA'd baits. Cut off as so, draw them up to that. Then take the end of that, loop it over and pull it tight against it. Just leave a little gap of approximately 2 millimeters. Leave each gap like that, and there you have a PVA stringer. It's important to leave a gap between each bait, as this allows the water to attack the PVA and dissolve it. When that PVA dissolves, though with a hook bait there and 3 baits tight to it, the carp will then smell the attraction of 4 baits and is far more likely to pick your hook bait up. This is a very effective method in gravel pits and silty waters. Bait application on these large waters is vitally important. When you're fishing at over 60 yards and possibly up to 90 yards, you want to make sure the free offerings you put out attract the carp to your hook bait and not away from it. So if your free offerings are landing all over the place and hardly anywhere near your hook bait, you're wasting your time, you're cutting down your chances. The throwing stick, absolutely excellent for putting baits out at range, but not always as accurate as people imagine they are. If you've actually practiced and can use one properly, they're great. But if you haven't practiced, it's going to cost you fish in the long run. Catapults. This is a fox pult. Very easy to use and very accurate, up to 70 or 80 yards. I know people complain about catapults saying that they rasp their hands. Take a glove. This will stop you rasping your knuckles with that. Always carry with you spare pouches, spare elastics and spare ties, because if the elastic breaks halfway through a session and you can't bait up as accurate as you could, it's going to cost you fish. Be prepared for all circumstances. When baiting up, always take your time and be accurate with your catapult or your throwing stick or whatever you're using. Don't just rush and fire them out all over the place. One at a time and accurately at the marker. If you're fishing to a marker or to a specific mark on the pit, they want to be dropping no more than inches, at the very most 1 foot from the marker. Don't accept them flying all over the place. The problem is, with these very fine hook lengths and very small hooks and this pre-stretched line, there's not much give when you're playing fish, especially with a rod 2 3/4. So when the fish is lunging about like that, as you can see there, there's always the danger of the fish pulling the hook out. The trick, if there is a trick I hope, is rather than trying to pull the fish in, is to lead the fish in, to actually guide it in. Let it think it's getting its own way a little, but to guide the fish in, especially when it's coming close in like this. Landing net ready. Try not to scare or spook the fish by waving the landing net in. You can see the fish isn't quite ready for giving up yet. Haven't seen the fish yet. Only a little bit to go. It's crashing about now in front of me. It's a nice fish. No need to rush here. This is when people pull hooks out, when they try and pull the carp onto the surface, because once the carp's on the surface, it in effect is a dead weight. Its weight is not supported by the water anymore. So you've got to be very careful at this stage not to go mad. You can see it's a nice comet. Still not ready. Still rolling. It's going to come above the net in a minute. Still not ready. Good fight this. That's it. In the net it goes. And that's the first fish of the session. We've been cast out. Whoa! We've been cast out probably 3 or 4 minutes. Fish there, lovely common, probably well into double figures. What an excellent start to the session. Just shows if you get your baits right, get your rigs right, find where the fish are. Doesn't take hours to catch fish, doesn't take days to catch fish. You can catch them as easy as that. Look at that fish and you think, yeah, but it's all right for him. You can catch these, honestly, dead easy. Fish is in the net. Let's make sure we get it all right now. First of all, make sure your weigh sling is on your unhooking mat and wetted. If you put the fish on a dry unhooking mat or weigh sling, it'll take the mucus off. Unclip the arms on your landing net. Put the landing net pole out of the way. Make sure the fish is fully supported in the net, still a bit lively. Keep it well away from that gravel. And lift it up. Just move your rod out the way. Fish goes onto the unhooking mat, as so. At this stage the fish may still be very lively. Absolutely beautiful common that. Make sure your hands are wet. Absolutely gorgeous. Although this is called a common carp, for many anglers this isn't a common carp at all. Not many waters have commons, but this water is one of the unusual ones. Make sure your hands are wet and look where the hook is. The hook's come out of there and moved, so there's no way that I'm going to push that out with my fingers. What I'm going to do is use forceps to take the hook out. If you push hooks out with fingers, you can make a real mess. So, see the carp is lively there. Just grip the hook like that. Gently tease it out. Be very careful when you actually lift the hook out that the lead doesn't catch on the fish and take its scales off. When you're fishing a gravel pit, you've got to be aware of how that gravel can actually affect parts of your presentation. Whether you've had a fish or just wound in, always feel the hook length and make sure it's not in any way been chafed or strained. Look at the hook and feel the point. Still razor sharp, no problem. If it's turned over, put a new hook on. Also, look at your lead. Coming into contact with gravel, it can actually chafe parts of your lead away. This coating protects it. I've run my fingers round it and clearly it's still alright. If there's any damage, it'll actually wear your hook length out. Little tips like that will actually save you losing fish. Now these kind of small hooks on gravel pits and silty waters, they can actually rip out of the carp's mouth. So when you're playing the carp, don't actually try and pull its head off. Try and lead it in gradually. It's going to come in nice and steady. I think the phrase is like a dog on a lead. If you try and pull it in straight away, all you'll do is pull the hook out of its mouth. If you take your time, almost like leading around, just gradually, just bringing it back nice and slowly. We're now getting to the safety point. As you can see, the shock leader is now almost on. It's almost on. Now we're fishing straight through 35 pounds. Fish is coming in, looks like a nice little common again. Take the time. Wait till the fish is beaten. Still not ready for the net. Just be careful about what it's going in the margins. The problem is when they see this net in the shallow water, it's clear water here, can scare them. Nice little fish. See the fish there saw the net. This bit of wind actually puts a bit of colour in the water, which is to my advantage. But it's still nice and close in. There we go. And still not ready. A lively fish. Problem with the fish is that when they actually get close in and the head comes out of the water, the weight is off the fish. That is ready. Still won't give in, and it's now ready for the net and in. Another fish from a gravel pit. Again, another common. Probably about 12 pound, I would think. Buzzers off. Yep, I would say that's about 10 pound or so. Another nice fish. Right. Break the landing net down in the water. If you try and walk around with a pole, you're likely to end up snagging everywhere. Unhook your mat, still wet. Support the carp's weight. Lift it up. Right onto the unhooking mat. It's a smaller fish than I thought. Still lively. It's about 8 to 9 pounds, this. Called a common carp. Beautiful scalings on it. The fish is very confident. It's actually taken the bait right back into its mouth, so we're going to need forceps on this one. You can see how important it is to have an unhooking mat. The fish is still lively. Just support the carp between your legs so it can't go anywhere. Forceps grip the hook, just gently push it, lift it straight out like that. Nice and easy. Make sure the lead is well away from the carp, out of harm's way. Stop the carp flapping anywhere. See, the carp always wants to get back into the water, its natural habitat. Make sure it's covered in water. The rod out the way so nobody stands on it. And there we have nice little carp, probably about 7 or 8 pounds. One of the problems many anglers have when fishing these larger waters is actually reaching the distance. As we've talked about, the shock leaders, they do make a difference. But always remember, put your shock leader knot at the back of your spool. That means when you're casting out, the leader won't brush across that knot. Always put it to the back, wind the rest of your shock leader around the front, and when you cast it won't flick against it. Very little handy trick which has just come out from Christon is this grease lightning. You actually just squirt it onto your reel line, let it soak in, and what it does, it lubricates the line, it puts like a sheen on it, and you can actually cast out further with it. I know it sounds silly, but it actually is true. It puts like a smooth sheen on it, and any abrasions on your line are taken out, and it often adds probably 10 or 15 yards to most anglers' casts. So if you're struggling to get those 10 or 15 yards, this can make a difference. He's very strong, which is with a small hook. I'm trying to be very careful, more careful than I would normally be. We're straight through 15-pound line and say a 4 or a 6 hook. Oops, and it looks like I'm going to get another one here, but that is going to have to wait, I'm afraid to say. This is on at the moment, I'm afraid. Yes, this is one of those situations. Yes, that's a nice fish, this. Oh, can you believe it? Ah, dearie me. But I'm into a carp here now. I think it's a carp anyway. That was a fish I've probably put about 14 or 15 pounds that I've lost there. And this feels like a tench of about a pound and a half. It's just the way it is, unfortunately. Sometimes they stay on when they're tench, and sometimes they fall off when they're carp. That is a tench, and it's come straight in as they do. Yeah, beautiful common carp here. Nearly scale perfect. I would guess somewhere around the 14-pound mark. Absolutely gorgeous fish, this. Now, the hooks, just to show you, the hook is actually fallen out in the net, which is incredible. That was a very, very lucky fish. Fish had been on probably somewhere in the region of 10 minutes or so, and the hook's actually fallen out in the net. What a beautiful fish. Very light coloured one, this. Unusual. What a lovely fish. I would say about 12 or 13 pounds. Still quite lively. Always beware. They don't like the feel of warm hands on them. Even though your hands are wet, the light on them does scare them. Absolutely gorgeous fish. Beautiful gravel pit carp, and one everybody can aspire to catching. A real beauty. Let's put him back now and make somebody else's day. Here we are. Another nice, possibly scraping into low doubles, high singles. Beautiful linear mirror. See the scales there? A line of linear, double linear. Absolutely beautiful. Only a small fish in comparative terms in today's fishing, but really that's the sort of size of fish that are going to be our future. Beautiful gravel pit fish, very basic rigs, very basic baits. Location was spot on, so was bait application, and believe you me, it's easy for me, it's easy for you as well. Hope this video has helped you. Let's put this little fish back to go to be a bigger one. There we go.